Our career speaker guest today is Darren McBride from the Sierra Computer Group. Darren, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, thanks for coming. So we've got students of all ages watching, and you're an entrepreneur, an engineer, and general good guy. Tell us, what does Sierra Computer Group do?
We started out as a computer store, so we just sold computers for many, many years. But then, as the competition grew in Reno and computers were sold at very low prices at department stores, we really got into more of the service side of things. So what we still sell computers and equipment, but mainly what we do is put in networks and help people with problems, like if they have a problem getting their email working on their cell phone, or if they have a problem where 5 people can't connect to the accounting software in a small office, then we help them set those computers up and make sure everything works.
Okay. So let's unpack a couple things you said. So in the old days, you actually had a store where people would walk in and buy a computer. And I mean, that may seem antiquated to some of our viewers. Um, what changed? Who came into town and started competing against you that made you change your mind about that business model?
Well, we always had competition from the time I started in around 1987. There were small computer shops that were selling computers. And when we started, we were the low price leader because we had very small office space, so we had low rent, and we were able to also buy computers overseas and put them together and gain a price advantage over some of the other computer shops in town. So we had the best pricing, and that led to success in selling the computers. Eventually what happened is the name brand computers, and back then there were computers like Leading Edge that don't even exist anymore, but they certainly, there was Compaq that doesn't exist because they got bought out by HP. So those brands came along, and then slowly what happened is, I don't know if anybody still remembers CompUSA coming into town. They actually came in and then went out of business, but we still have people like Best Buy and big retailers that sell computers in the area. And typically they only mark up the computer by a few percent. And so we're not even competing with those guys directly anymore, but you can still walk into a retail store and buy computers in the town.
Okay, I want to define a couple of the terms that you mentioned. So you talked about your competitive advantage in the beginning. You were able to sell your computers cheaper because you were able to get them cheaper because you were buying the pieces overseas where they were cheaper, and the rent in your shop was pretty low. So when you put it all together, you could sell computers cheaper than the other guys and still make enough of a profit to run a business. And then later you mentioned when the big box stores, places like Best Buy, Circuit City, CompUSA, and some of those are out of business themselves, they came in, they were putting such a small markup. They were asking for such small amount of profit that it became very hard to compete. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I could always compete with them, but you might only make $50 selling a computer, and we have always been very service oriented, and so if there's a warranty claim, we wanted to be able to service that warranty claim. And so the amount of money we were making on selling the individual computers wasn't enough to also support the warranty. And there was a point at which we kind of looked at it and said it makes more sense for us to sell our labor, our time, to help people set them up, so that if you bought a computer down at Best Buy and then needed help, that's okay because we would make the money on the labor.
Okay, so you pivoted the business model and decided to be a service business because when you're a service business, you can charge for your time instead of for a product that a lot of the customers feel is a commodity, so they're very price sensitive. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's still true today. If you quote somebody a price on a computer and they can look on Amazon or on Newegg online and find it $100 cheaper, they actually think you're ripping them off. Now, there are business clients who realize, you need to make that $100 and it's worth it because you're going to go service the warranty, get the computer, install the computer. And so still about 20% of our sales every month is in hardware. So we still will make money selling hardware and software, but it's to business clients more so than to home customers.
Okay. Yeah, and personally, I've always gravitated towards service-based businesses because it's something you've got control over. You don't have control whether a competitor is going to offer a cheaper price on a product, but when it comes to service, you are able to control whether you show up on time, whether you're friendly to the customer, whether you do a good job for them. Things like that are at least within your control. So I personally gravitate towards service businesses. Let's talk about your education. How did you get into being an entrepreneur, and what kind of schooling did you get?
Well, I think that if your parents are entrepreneurs, you tend to, whether you realize it as a young person or not, you tend to role model someone in your life, and parents are, and teachers are obviously role models. In my case, my dad owned a small business in Reno, a machine shop, and I had worked in the machine shop as a teenager and felt like it was a dirty business and I didn't want to go into that business. But also what happened is in high school, I didn't know I was good at math. I didn't get particularly good math grades, but when I took my SAT, they said, well, your math scores are quite high. You should become an engineer. And to me, an engineer was the guy at the back of the caboose of a train, because as a kid, that was, I didn't know what the
That's what you called an engineer, yeah.
that's what we called an engineer. But I checked up at the University of Nevada, Reno. They had three types of engineers: civil, mechanical, and electrical. And I chose electrical because I had tested well on math. I needed to go to a local school. And so I went to the University of Nevada, Reno and got a degree in electrical engineering, which then generated my interest in computers, because one of the five specialties of electrical engineering is computers. And when I graduated, I went to work for a local company in Carson City that was actually manufacturing computers at that time, and quickly discovered that the people selling those computers really didn't know what they were doing. So the combination of having my dad as a role model, and then a love for computers, and then seeing a market opportunity led me to go into business for myself.
So did you ever work for anyone else after college, or were you always an entrepreneur?
I actually worked for that manufacturer I mentioned in Carson City for only about 9 months after I graduated from college. And when I quit, it was actually to go after some of the customers of that company, which was called IMS International at the time. I think now it's called Cubics Corporation, but some of the customers needed help. And I was able to, using my contacts that I'd established there, sort of start doing work for those guys right away. But it was not very long after I graduated from college. I was still a broke college student. I had the broke college student mentality, so I didn't need a lot of money to live on. The other way I've seen people start a company is to wait until after they establish themselves and have a family and save up some money to start a new business. In my case, I just pulled the Band-Aid off and did it while I didn't need a lot of money to live on.
How, how much startup capital, how much money did you need to start the business? Because it sounds like you needed to buy products to sell, you needed a storefront, so you had to pay rent, maybe you needed employees. Kind of walk us through the early stages.
Well, I bootstrapped. I didn't have very much money. For that job I mentioned, I got a pretty good salary when I graduated from college, but for the initial few months, was still living at home, and so I saved some money. And then when I moved out and rented a house of my own, I actually started the business in the garage for the first 6, 7 months. And the way I got customers is I put a classified ad in the newspaper, and these are things that no longer really exist. The classified ads aren't really in the newspaper. They're there in the newspaper, but they aren't the primary place where a customer would go to buy a computer. But you might be able to do something similar with, say, Craigslist, advertise that you have a computer for sale. And that's how I did it. And after 6 or 7 months, I had sold enough computers to get a small office, and it was still just me, no employees. So I was keeping my overhead low, but I did it a little bit at a time and funded myself.
Okay, that's fantastic. I want to pull apart a few of the things you've talked about for our students. So one thing you mentioned, I consider you lucky that you had parents who were entrepreneurs as a role model? I know for me, I didn't. My parents worked very normal 9 to 5 jobs. So I had to seek my entrepreneurial role models elsewhere. I had to find people that had the risk tolerance that I didn't. You mentioned back in high school you worked for your dad. Quick question on that. A lot of our students nowadays are up to their eyebrows with extracurricular activities, whether it's soccer, speech and debate, karate, whatever, which I think all that stuff is great. But if you had to choose, if you had a kid in high school or junior high right now, and they're going to do their activity all summer long or get a job working for someone, what do you think would be more valuable for them in the long term?
I think both are valuable. I was on the wrestling team in high school, and I really feel like the wrestling team, the time I spent on that, gave me a really strong work ethic. And I think part of keeping your entrepreneurial spirit up is physically moving and feeling good about yourself and exercising. So that was an important element to me. But I do think you can overdo activities where, you mentioned if you do music lessons and karate lessons, and, pretty soon you don't have any time to learn about the world of work. So I do think that either working for someone or perhaps even trying mowing lawns. I mean, you mentioned something that I think is interesting about the service business and being able to control it. And in my mind, there's always sort of four general categories of business. The first is service, then the second would be retail, where you're reselling someone else's goods in a small store. The next level up would be something called wholesale, which is where you have this big warehouse and maybe you're selling goods to a retailer. And then the ultimate fourth level of business would be if you were to build a better mousetrap, that is a manufacturer, somebody who's created something and is able to manufacture. Each of those four types of businesses are a bit harder than the next to get into. That is the easiest type of business to start is a service business. And if you're going to mow someone's lawn, you have to be able to pay for a lawnmower and go out and get one or two clients and you grow it. And so in general, a lot of small businesses are service businesses, and that's how you can get started. And then if you want to sell your lawn mowing clients sprinkler systems or something where you make money on the hardware, you can do that. So I think service business is a place to start. And I think as a student, you can do that. You can actually kind of start a little summer business and make a little money. And that's very instructive.
I totally agree. In the first entrepreneurial business activity I did was a house painting business. And I literally just went knocking on people's doors saying, would you like an estimate for painting? And I got lucky. 2 people hired me from the estimates. Out of the first 5 estimates I did, 2 people hired me. They gave me a deposit. I used that deposit to buy equipment. So you had mentioned bootstrapping earlier. For anyone who doesn't know that term, it means when you're starting a business, you can start it very, very cheap. Darren worked out of his garage, and he was, his advertising was classified ads. Nowadays, students can do the same thing. If you want to do a lawn mowing business, you could borrow a lawnmower from your neighbor, pay them a little bit as you get clients. You can knock on doors. You could put ads on Craigslist. That's called hustle. That's what entrepreneurs do. So now at this point, we'll kind of finish up the story. The business has grown a lot. Now you've got employees in a bigger office and a much bigger footprint. Tell us what your business is like nowadays.
Well, we're in about a 10,000 square foot building over next to the post office on Vassar Street. It's a building that I had purchased using an SBA loan about 25 years ago. And then now at this point, that building has been paid off because, the loan was 20 years. So that really helps us because, we don't have to pay rent to someone else. We have about 12 to 13 employees, and most of those employees go out and help other small businesses with their computers. And as I mentioned, that could be email, that could be, they're having trouble with some sort of spreadsheet or Word, or mostly what we do is a little more sophisticated. We help them network their computers together. My days are no longer spent out helping clients. In fact, I don't even really do sales anymore. Mostly I watch the financials of the company. I help hire and train employees. And we also have something very important in a business, which is recurring revenue. That is customers that say, hey, I'd like to make sure you come by every month and make sure our computers run. That's the equivalent of having a good lawn mowing customer that you would go to every week and mow their lawn. And one of the things I've learned is that when I think about business opportunities, if there is an opportunity for recurring revenue, that is a client who wants to hire me week after week, month after month, that is better than having to hustle for every paint job, as you've
Yeah.
discovered,
And I've thought about that a lot too. And I think it comes down to the financials. If you're getting, $2,000 a month in recurring revenue from a customer, but I could sell a paint job for 20,000, it becomes a little more of a toss up. It depends how long a customer typically sticks around. But in general, I agree with you. The thought of recurring revenue is fantastic because it makes it much easier to predict your business, which makes it easier to decide, should you hire people? Should you buy equipment? Should you rent an office? All those kind of things are much easier when the economics are more predictable.
right.
Don't you think? Okay. So that's fantastic. So this is a great entrepreneurial story. It's Darren McBride of the Sierra Computer Group. Basically, he was just a kid who wrestled in high school, who got, whose grades were good but not great. But he realized through his SATs that he was really good at math. That sent him on a journey to go to college at UNR, learn about engineering, which he knew nothing about when he started. He chose electrical engineering. That put him on a path to know how to fiddle with computers. Eventually, he became an expert. He sold them. That business wasn't what was losing its profit margin. So he pivoted, he created a service business, and now he's been running it for what, 30 years?
35 years.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting path to becoming an entrepreneur and an expert. Darren, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate having you. If you want to just hit stop on record now.